Big 12 open for business.
Thank you, ESPN.
Oh, yeah, baby.
You know, Mitch.
We love the Cougars.
Welcome on in, Cougar Tracks podcast, powered by KSLSports.com. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. Happy as always to have you on board of the podcast, wherever and however you may be listening to the show. It's officially bowl season. As BYU now knows, they are officially going to San Antonio to play in the Alamo Bowl. They'll be facing the Colorado Buffaloes, a Big 12 foe, in San Antonio, Saturday, December 28th. Kickoff at 5:30 p.m. on ABC, ESPN+, and then you can listen to the call on KSL News Radio. We will get extended pregame coverage beginning at noon from San Antonio on game day. So be on the lookout for that coming up on Saturday, December 28th. So the Christmas season will be spent in San Antonio. Looking forward to going down there for the first time ever. I've never been to San Antonio. Had a layover there once, but never been in the city. So should be a lot of fun. And in this episode of the podcast, I'll be breaking down my thoughts on this BYU-Colorado matchup, just the initial thoughts and how it all came together, this bowl game. And also get onto the topic of Kalani Sitake's extension as well. You can follow me on X and Instagram, Mitch_Harper. Follow KSL Sports at KSL Sports on all the social media platforms, and download the KSL Sports app today and subscribe to this podcast and leave a 5-star rating and a review. So I know a lot of Cougar fans are probably mixed feelings on this game against Colorado, playing a fellow Big 12 team. And honestly, I agree. I kind of felt a little bit mixed as well. For selfish reasons, I kind of wanted the Pop-Tarts Bowl because I wanted to go down to Florida, see family during Christmas time, sure, for selfish reasons, but you don't care about those personal reasons. I also thought it'd just be fun to play another conference team because you're going to face Colorado next year in Boulder. But when you kind of take a step back and think about this BYU-Colorado matchup and all Big 12 tilt, man, I think it's a pretty cool matchup. It's one of the best bowl games I think BYU has ever been part of, to be quite honest with you. This is the 41st bowl game in BYU football history, and that's noteworthy considering BYU didn't get to its first bowl game until 50 years ago, and they're going to their 41st bowl game. So really, yes, it's the 100th season, but those 41 bids come in 50-year stretch. So it's a good hit rate where BYU is going to always be a team, more likely than not, playing in the postseason. But you think about the games that BYU has played in recent years in the bowl season. It's always been against Group of 5 teams. Kalani Sitake's program has never faced a power conference team in the bowl season. And Kalani's been the head coach at BYU since 2016. This will be his 7th bowl game appearance as head coach of the Cougars. You got to go back to 2013 to find the last time BYU played a game after Christmas. That was the Fight Hunger Bowl against Washington. Last time they played a power conference team was 2015, and that was kind of a quirky deal too. It was a rivalry game against Utah. So there's just not much, kind of meat on the bone with BYU's bowl history in the 21st century. It's primarily been Vegas. It's been, 6th-place Pac-12 team back in the day, Pac-10 team back then. Just not much. And the Alamo Bowl, historically, and I know college football playoff era, the non-playoff games, they're glorified exhibitions. And I know it for what it is. But I just think that it's a pretty cool game. And playing in a dome, the weather's not going to have an impact on what BYU does. BYU didn't play in the Big 12 championship game, so there's not that feeling of, we're in this game because we blew it in Arlington, even though BYU did kind of blow it in the final month of the season, not getting to that game, but still you don't have that carryover. They've kind of already moved on from the fact that they were not part of that game. So I think you could get really laser focused for this opportunity to play a Colorado team that's 9-3, really talented football team. Coach Prime is bigger than life. He's got bigger than life stars with Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, and he kind of said once again in the introductory bowl press conference, not press conference because there's no questions from the media, but introductory conference, that the pro-bound players on the Colorado roster are going to play. They're not going to tap out. And I think that's pretty awesome. And, Coach Prime has never said anything at the podium that makes him seem like he's just saying stuff to move away from the topic. Like, he's pretty straight up on the pressers. Now, he's got a different style that I think rubs some people in college football media and the college football world the wrong way, but I think Coach Prime's pretty candid, and I like his style, and I've always kind of been intrigued by the way he's building his Colorado program. And, he's candid about his roster construction. Look, I've been a believer in what Colorado's doing since the moment they hired him. I mean, I was going on the Zone radio interviews and saying they could be a playoff team in the first 2 years with Coach Prime. And they obviously didn't get to the playoff this year, but I think they've got that ability, being in the Big 12 Conference, the way that he's recruiting. I mean, he's getting 5-star blue-chip talent. No 5 stars composite this year in this cycle, but still he's getting some high-end talent going to Boulder, which on average per recruit is probably going to be higher than most Big 12 football teams. So I think it's a huge stage, and I think that if you got the chance to potentially play the Heisman Trophy winner, Travis Hunter, I believe he's going to win the Heisman. What an opportunity for BYU. You think about Chase Roberts, who's considering the NFL. What a chance to put out film and have a successful game against the best of the best. A guy that's going to be a first-round draft pick, who's the best defensive back in college football. Go up against Travis Hunter. That's just a massive spectacle. And I think the crowd's going to be good. And I think the flip side argument is, well, you want to take down an opposing conference to help the narrative of the Big 12. And I get that. And I think there's something to that in the bowl season. A lot of conference pride takes place in the bowl season. But is the narrative going to change if Baylor, who's playing in the Texas Bowl against LSU, if they beat LSU in the Texas Bowl, we know what's going to happen. LSU didn't want to be there. Is that going to change the narrative? Well, come to Death Valley at night. Come to the environments here in the SEC, it's a little bit different animal than the second-rate Big 12. Like, is that narrative going to change because of a bowl game in December? I don't know. If BYU played Miami in the Pop-Tarts Bowl and beat them, does that suddenly make BYU and the Big 12 close the gap on SEC, Big 10, and Big 12 ACC? I don't think so. You got Nick Saban on Selection Sunday saying, maybe we need the top 30 programs to just potentially break off and crown their own champion. Is a bowl game between BYU and Miami going to change that narrative? No, I don't think so. I've watched this sport long enough that it just seems like no matter what these leagues or teams do, unless they maintain a high level of consistency year after year after year, you're not going to have much narrative changing. Especially in the bowl season when the narrative out there is, well, if you're not in the playoff, what do these games really mean? Everyone's opting out, this and that, da-da-da-da-da. Look, I feel like BYU and Colorado want to be in this game. And I think that, to me, that's why I'm excited for this matchup. That's why I'm excited to see BYU and Colorado duke it out and lay claim to being officially, I think, the second-best team in the Big 12. I don't know if that's the branding they want of this game, but to show that they're among the best teams right next to Arizona State in this conference, make it clear, and it can really be a showcase for the Big 12. If they have a massive crowd at the Alamo Dome, that would be pretty impressive and showcase potentially these two programs, going into a town that's one time zone away for the both of them, both in the Mountain Time Zone. They're going to go down to the Central Time Zone and load up the Alamo Dome. I think that would be an impressive thing from a narrative perspective for the Big 12. Say, hey, wow, they had a 66,000 plus at the Alamo Bowl that had nothing on the line, and they filled it up. Coach Prime said in his introductory comments that he expects it to beat the Texas A&M record. I believe that was 2007. I think it was around 66,000 fans. BYU fans are going to show up, I would imagine. I'm curious to see what the BYU turnout will look like. I got to think BYU fans are excited for this matchup. I know the BYU fans in the state of Texas, they're going to show up. And the surrounding areas, they're going to show up. I'm curious how many BYU fans travel from the state of Utah to San Antonio. That I don't really know. Colorado's pretty confident they're going to have a lot of fans at this game. And I think with Colorado, too, when it comes to the crowd piece, because of Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders and Coach Prime, they kind of infiltrate just mainstream sports fans where they want to be around them. Like even my kids, and I'm not saying that kids aren't going to know this stuff, but the way that they consume content and media and information is different than any of us. And they're well aware of Travis Hunter, Coach Prime, Shedeur. Like, they're huge stars. And so you'll get that person who's just like a sports fan or maybe likes individual athletes and stars. You probably get these people that are in that San Antonio era that want to go to that game. So I think it's a cool game. I think it's an awesome matchup. I'm excited to see Kalani and Coach Prime have a joint press conference the day before the game down in San Antonio. I thought the commentary between the two coaches in the introductory press conference was kind and cordial, and I think very respectful. Coach Prime was very kind to Kalani Sitake, even pointed out his contract extension, and Kalani was complimentary of Coach Prime. Like, I just think it's a good matchup, and I think it's a lot of fun. And you know what? If it has where BYU wins, maybe it creates a little bit extra juice for next year's game in Boulder, Folsom Field. I think, again, just chasing the narrative piece and trying to, help the Big 12 change something. Well, what's it going to change? What's it going to change, really? People are set in their ways. A bowl game in the Alamo Bowl against someone from another conference or the Pop-Tarts Bowl is not going to change the narrative of the Big 12. It's just not. It's just not. I just don't expect this sport to do that. I'd like to, be a little bit more open-minded and think that, hey, maybe actual results on the field do matter. And maybe that can change the viewpoints of how people see this conference and this league. Like when you watch Arizona State and see how dominant they've been the past few weeks and how BYU was very competitive against them in that second half, hey, maybe that BYU team's much better than we think. And, hey, maybe Arizona State's a lot better than Boise State. Should have been that 3 seed. Honestly, Arizona State should have been the 3 seed in the playoff bracket, in my opinion. You kind of wonder, too, how much of the conversation centered around, well, do we want them to have a glorified home game? I don't know. You don't want to get into conspiracy talk, but Boise State, I just don't feel like had the better resume than Arizona State. And I think that the early rankings for Boise just kind of helped them stay sizably in front of Arizona State. Whereas if you didn't have a weekly rankings release, I think it would have been a different story. You probably put Arizona State in that 3 seed and Boise State at the 4 spot. But BYU and Colorado should be a fun one. I'm looking forward to it. I'll be down in San Antonio, and I'll have you covered throughout the week at KSLSports.com. And again, the star power of Colorado is fascinating, and I just think it's a big-time bowl game. Like, I'm looking through BYU's bowl history. New Mexico Bowl against SMU. Independence Bowl. Boca Raton Bowl. Boca Raton Bowl was a really good game, but it was during COVID. It was weird. Zach Wilson, Dylan Gabriel. It was a pretty big-time game. I mean, that was legit, but still at the time, both teams were out of the out of the power conference ranks at that time. Hawaii Bowl on Christmas Eve. Idaho Potato Bowl. Poinsettia Bowl. Those are the games during the Kalani era. And then you compare that to the Alamo Bowl, massive payout. And I don't get caught up into the financials or the money, because that does nothing for the fans. But for the health of a conference and financially, like the Big 12 gets to pocket all this money from the Alamo Bowl, reportedly around $9 million. So a lot of money to be had, and BYU hasn't been part of a big money bowl game like that in a long time. They haven't played in a game in the bowl game in Texas since 2011, the Armed Forces Bowl. Prior to that, it was the 1997 Cotton Bowl Classic against K-State. So I'm on board with the game. Like I see the argument from Cougar fans wanting something else, but you also, and I haven't brought this up yet, but you haven't played Colorado since 1988. most of the Cougar fans that wanted something different have never in their lifetimes witnessed BYU and that logo square off against CU, that logo, gold helmet, and the Buffs. Never seen it in their lifetime. You got to go back to the 1988 Freedom Bowl. Jason Chaffetz, I believe, hit a game winner at the horn, and BYU took down a Buffs program that was really taking off. And it was kind of the building blocks of them becoming a dynasty in the Big Eight, and they went on to win a co-national championship, I believe, in 1991. So, BYU and Colorado don't have much history. It's not like you're seeing this matchup all the time. And even in the Big 12, yes, they're in the same league, but this is not going to be an annual matchup. This is not like BYU-Utah. This will be, once every 2 years. So I'm okay with it. I'm on board with it. And to get a chance to play the Buffs when they have just superstar, bigger-than-life talents, I think that's pretty cool. And it can really be an exclamation mark on BYU season, because Colorado is the one program in the Big 12 that was always a talking point in the league. Even when BYU jumped out to their 9-0 start, no one was talking about BYU nationally. They were number 6 in the college football playoff rankings, but no one was talking BYU. It was all about, well, Colorado's streaking. They're rolling. They're probably going to get to Arlington. They're going to probably be the playoff representative from the Big 12. Even Joel Klatt, when they were Big Noon kickoff in Provo, he's standing in front of a bunch of BYU students, and at no point did he and the panel on Big Noon kickoff talk about BYU as being a threat to win the Big 12. They were all talking about Colorado, Iowa State. I don't think anyone mentioned Arizona State, but they were just still out of sight, out of mind. And so you got a chance here to take down a team that has been the most discussed team in the Big 12. And again, you want to talk about narrative, that can help, and you put eyeballs on the BYU brand, because this game, Colorado's a walking draw. I mean, they just deliver massive ratings. And I got to think the Saturday after Christmas, when no one knows what day it is in life, like that week after Christmas, like no one knows what time it is, what day it is. Every day is basically a Saturday, but you get that actual Saturday after Christmas where no one's working, and you want to watch some football. You've gone through all the gifts. You've gone through all the toys. You're just kind of winding down now and enjoying your time in a weird week. That's going to be a huge audience. I mean, that could be an all-timer in BYU television ratings potentially. And just from that standpoint, again, going to narrative and going to, improving your brand, that's a pretty exciting opportunity. And I think that's a lot of fun. And a primetime kick, network television, I know that doesn't have the same clout like it once did, but you see the ratings that college football's been getting on ABC, largely in part with the SEC. I get that. But that could be huge numbers. And Coach Prime's personality and Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, man, and BYU, I think it's just a good storyline game. And I think Kalani's a great personality. I think it's a really good game. And I think it's one that's going to be one of the best in the bowl season this year, outside of the college football playoff rankings, or college football playoff 12-team bracket, excuse me. So I'm excited. I can't wait to see it. I think this is going to be a lot of fun watching BYU square off against the Colorado Buffaloes. It will be interesting also to see, some personnel notes. Does Braden Keim, is he able to give it a go, one final chance? I mean, because this could be a game for him where he could, help his NFL draft stock if he can get back from injury and be able to play in that game, because Colorado's got some good players on that defensive front. BJ Green on that defensive line. I'm glad to say, too, he was my preseason Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year pick, newcomer pick of the year, and he's been awesome, and he earned that award this past week from the Big 12. So BJ Green will be a force along that defensive front for Colorado. They got some talent, and I just think this could be a real showcase game for some of the upperclassmen for BYU. If they can have some big performances, that gives them some individual film to showcase to NFL scouts, and then you pair that up with the bowl prep opportunities for the younger players to get ready for 2025. I just like the dynamic. I like you got the transfer portal opening this week, and you'll still manage, practices this week in Provo, and then next week you got a full week of practice. You're going to have to navigate finals too. But, it felt like with these pre-Christmas bowls in the past, it was all kind of rushed. You had the portal, you had signing day coming up, and now signing day is already done. It's taken care of, and you'll have finals, but then you still got time after finals are completed to dial in, get ready for the bowl game, and lock in, and then you got the travel. I kind of like the setup. I like the schedule of all this, how this all maps out for BYU and the calendar, the logistics, because some of these pre-Christmas bowls before, they just were a whirlwind where there was so much getting thrown at you, and this one sets up quite well to where BYU can really maximize this as kind of a, I don't want to say glorified spring ball, but in some aspects, like a spring ball. And that can really catapult you then into 2025, where you kind of hit the ground running in the first week of March, which is typically when BYU starts their spring practices. And that's not that far away. We're less than 3 months until that. You can really kind of get a jump start on that. So I really like this bowl setup for BYU, and it's not ideal, especially considering the season started 9-0. You would have loved to have seen a Big 12 title. You would have loved to have seen a 12-team college football playoff appearance, either a home game or a first-round bye. But as a consolation, I think this is a solid landing spot, and it's going to be an entertaining, made-for-TV event between Kalani and Coach Prime, BYU, and the Buffs. So sign me up. I'm ready for that. Speaking of signing me up, Kalani Sitake's signing some documents. He signed a contract extension. BYU didn't officially announce the length of the extension, but they coined it as a long-term extension. And it's the right move for BYU and Kalani Sitake. And understand, too, when it comes to contract extensions, this is not some, Kalani's agent's always just working the extension angle. It's kind of standard operating business procedure at power conference programs where you have a big season that far exceeds expectations. You deliver an extension. And I think, too, what helps BYU here is that you've got a situation where you're making it clear to in-state recruits that, hey, Kalani Sitake, what you saw this year in the Big 12, 10-2 season, he's going to continue to be the leader of that program. What that product was in 2024, he's going to continue to lead BYU going forward into the future in the heart of the Big 12 era for the Cougars. And when you pair that up with still kind of the uncertainty with Utah's coaching situation, I know Kyle Whittingham announced Michael Jordan style that he's back for the 2025 season, but is 2025 going to be it? He kind of set an unofficial timeline when he said, Kyle Whittingham did, that he's not going to be coaching that Utah versus Miami game in 2027 in Las Vegas. So it's clearly nearing the end, potentially, for Kyle Whittingham. At least it would seem to believe that. And, it just makes a clear message that Kalani is the face of the program. And I think, honestly, he's the right man for the job. And, fending off Utah State to keep Jay Hill, I thought was significant for BYU. And it's just, this is a good program right now that's in a healthy place. I think some areas where Kalani can continue to level it up is continuing to find areas to enhance the donations and the NIL game. And that's going to be the role of the general manager. It's not going to be on Kalani's plate, but still, it's got to be the point of mind. I know that revenue sharing is coming into play, but there's still going to be programs that are power conference peers that are still doing revenue sharing on top of NIL and just doing rev share at a completely different level than other programs within the power conference structure. You've got to remain competitive in that space. And even Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark has laid out that he expects his Big 12 institutions to be highly competitive in the revenue sharing and NIL game moving forward, because that is the name of the game. And I know it's tough to kind of digest for Cougar fans and so many fans in college sports to have to, hear about these financials and things like that, but it's just kind of what it is now. And I think that it's okay because it kind of streamlines things a little bit easier. Now it's going to be building out a 105-man roster. I like it, and I'm okay with some of the changes. Yes, it it can be a little bit frustrating when you're hearing so-and-so structured a new deal, so he's coming back to this program in 2025. Like, what? What are we doing in college football that's the terminology being used? But that's just the name of the game now, as there's more money than ever before in this sport. And, the unspoken is clearly spoken now, and that's okay. And I think that with money involved, it's not hurting the product. I mean, the product is getting better. College football is getting more parity than ever before, even though the SEC and the Big Ten would like to say that that's not the case. It is. There's better football across the board around college football, and you watch it in the power conferences. There's so much talent everywhere you look, and you've got good teams emerging everywhere with, deep support staffs and recruiting budgets. It's just highly competitive. It's a lot of fun, and it's great, great product to watch and consume as a spectator. So, but Kalani Sitake is the right guy for BYU football. And I think with Kalani, too, the love and learning approach that many have sometimes joked about or criticized, it's shining through. And this season was a byproduct of that. And look, it's not a guarantee that next year in 2025 that BYU is going to be a 10-win team again. It's just not. Like, they could easily go 5-7 again. They could. That's just the Big 12. Look at what Kansas did this year. I mean, it's just how this league kind of operates. But I think the thing is that Kalani is never going to change, regardless of like the big picture overarching themes of the program are not going to change based on the results on the field. And because of that, I think it creates a lot of players want to be part of that, where they want to play for Kalani. I mean, they work hard for Kalani. They want to win for Kalani. I mean, to get everyone back and to buy into a BYU program that, quite frankly, last year in stretches of the season looked like they didn't belong in power conference football, and to still kind of rally and be competitive in that Oklahoma State games, and then all kind of run it back this season, it shows you that culture can shine through, and you can have some really good football teams despite maybe not as deep of a roster when it comes to the star recruiting talent. And Kalani's done a really good job of that. And I think there's a nuance to BYU football that you have to understand its history too. You have to connect with what the mission of BYU is as a school, and just the uniqueness of the football program. Like, BYU is not a place where you can just go hire a coach that's an up-and-comer, and that's just going to work. It sounds nice on the surface that can be a thing, and, you can do that with OCs and DCs, and sometimes you could argue that those are maybe more important hires than even the head coach, because the head coach needs to be – it's a limited coaching pool. But to have the head coach, they've got to understand just like the history and what BYU football means to its fans. And there's no one better at that than Kalani Sitake. And then you pair it up with a great football mind who kind of is a self-deprecating individual at times, where he doesn't give himself enough credit for how good of a football coach he is. And I think he deserves a little more props than he gets. I think sometimes people don't give him enough credit for how good of a coach he can be. Now, he's like any coach. He's had his moments where he's got to get better. He's got to get better sometimes with in-game and sometimes roster management and being a little more aggressive with, maybe having to make some cuts and things like that on the roster. But, when he has made changes, when he's made upgrades, when he's improved or enhanced his roster or his staff, it's always improved. It's always seen an uptick. And I just think Kalani's got a good feel for what BYU football, the direction they're going. And the way that they perform, too, in some big games, there's been some duds. Arizona State, Kansas, that was a lackluster performance. But, man, they show up. They rise to the occasion. Rivalry games, they're showing up. They're winning. Even when it's ugly, they get victories. They got a 2-game winning streak over Utah. They've had big wins, SMU, Kansas State. Kalani's teams, they find ways to get big victories that Cougar fans were dreaming of for so many years. And he's kind of built up a nice resume of big-time wins that are worthy of hanging a banner underneath the LES concourse and having fans walking by the greatest victories in program history. He's building up a nice collection of those wins. And And I just think he's got a lot of potential still. And I wonder what that ceiling is. I believe that he's a guy that can be one of the best in the Big 12 and put BYU on a platform where they can be one of the best programs in the Big 12. And it's so great for Kalani that he's in a league where he can kind of stack himself up against peers. If this was just independent still, you probably don't even have Kalani Sitake anymore, to be quite frank, because he probably would have been poached and probably would have been looking elsewhere because, independents just didn't have much lasting power. I mean, honestly, they would have probably been part of the new Pac-12 iteration by now. If I would imagine if BYU didn't get their golden ticket to the Big 12, and you probably don't even have Kalani because it's just the separation has just been so drastic, so quick. And think about too, BYU had a 10-2 season in a year where they are a partial revenue share in the Big 12. They're going to be a full revenue share team and program and athletic department next year. So they delivered a 10-win season where they're still operating at half the budget of their Big 12 peers. And I just think there's more money to be had at BYU than people realize. And there's a greater commitment to sports, I think, from the upper tiers of the presidency, the board of trustees, than maybe 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I think BYU sports, like you could have got crazy and said, does BYU want to become the next BYU Idaho where they just lose sports altogether? That was radical, sure, but like you could have drawn up a scenario where that was possible. Now that's not the case. Like sports are just critical to BYU as a university, and they understand that. And Kalani Sitake, there's no one better to represent BYU football, the connection to the church. He's just someone that can connect with so many different individuals from all walks of life. And that's a unique skill. And at BYU, you've got to, it's not required, but man, it sure helps the cause to be able to go into really any home and kind of connect with those people or any recruit or connect with those individuals and really relate. And I just think that Kalani is the right man for BYU football. And look, there's still great candidates out there to one day kind of figure out what could be the succession plan. But you always have to have a big board ready. You never know. Kalani could one day say, this job, too good to pass up. And, my wife's from Florida. This job at the Florida Gators is just too good to pass up. I'm just speaking out loud, but, you never know what could be one day. You always got to keep tabs of who could be the next in line. Jay Hill, Kellen Moore, Kelly Papinga, Jason Beck, maybe if he has a lot of success at Utah. There's guys now. There's a big board of potential coaching candidates. But for right now, for where BYU's at, as they continue to settle into life in the Big 12, become a full revenue share distribution member in the Big 12, and they enter the revenue sharing era back to the players, he's the right man for the job. And I think to lock him in and make that clear to recruits, it can help the cause and maybe give BYU a chance to really take a leap with its recruiting class in the rankings and things like that. So big moves for BYU, big moves for Kalani Sitake, and now he's got the chance to kind of follow up that extension with a big performance in the Alamo Bowl, which would cap off a season that's been pretty impressive and could give BYU 11 wins for the second time in the Kalani Sitake era. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Cougar Tracks podcast. I hope all of you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating and a review. It helps out the show a ton, and I'll talk to you next time here on the Cougar Tracks podcast, and it's powered by KSLSports.com.